That's the main thing. Good evening, folks. A wee 5 minutes late. We do apologise. Simon seems to be having some camera issues, but he's here. He is there. We can hear him loud and clear. That's the main thing, that we can hear him and he's here. So tonight we've got Kate, history buff Kate Frasi, who's just back for our holiday bags. And we've got Top Hat Tours, Mr Pendle himself, a gentleman who's probably the foremost authority in the UK on the Pendle witch trials, Mr Simon Entwistle. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Scott. Nice to be back with you again.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on, Simon. Always great. I was watching your podcast earlier on this afternoon, and it was fascinating. It's I don't know what it is. It's the Pendle witches. I mean, it happened with 411 years ago, something like that. But it's one of the, no disrespect to the other witch trials, you know, that took place in the UK, but Pendle just seems to have that appeal to this day, worldwide. You know, thousands of people, you know yourself, Simon, thousands of people come every year to Pendle Hill, to the whole sort of Pendle area. So, I mean, we've covered the Pendle witches quite a few times, but it's a story that is still captivating. So, if you would, Simon, I'd like you to give a brief recap on the events of 1612 for anybody who's, you know, not familiar with it. And then I know Kate's got some questions for you. And I've got one or two as well, if that's all right, buddy.
Of course it is, Scott. We're looking at probably one of the most famous witch trials in British history. There's no two ways about it, really. The area known as the Forest of Pendle, way back in 1612, was very, very isolated. It was away from habitation. Also, it's predominantly Catholic. You had the Townley family from Burnley, Catholic landowners. The Southwards from Preston, Catholic landowners. And the Shireburn family, Ribble Valley Catholics. Now, at that period of time, we'd just lost Queen Elizabeth I, and she was replaced by none other than King James VI of Scotland, who became King James I of England. And this man was absolutely paranoid about witchcraft. He was also an ardent Protestant, and he hated the Catholics with a vengeance. He wrote a book called Demonology, which you can buy today from any leading bookshop. And as you pick it up, how to find a witch, how to try a witch, and most importantly, how to eradicate a witch. But throughout the whole length of Great Britain, this area, which we now know as the Forest of Pendle, did seem to stick out like a sore thumb. Now, living deep in that forest were two very, very elderly women. Elizabeth Southern, commonly known as Demdike, and Whittle, commonly known as Bessie Chattox. Both women were over 85 years old, and both women had somehow defied the laws of nature, because life expectancy, if you were lucky, would be 35. Remember, you've got to live off the land. There's no supermarkets, there's no hospitals, there's no surgeons, so therefore life would have been very, very tough in those days. What made these two women so unique is that there was a real hatred between the two of them. It's said that that Anne Whittle, commonly known as Chattox, broke into the home of Elizabeth Southern, a little cottage called Malkin Tower, and stole items of clothing and a bag of meal. But also, Elizabeth Southern was convinced that she had actually murdered her husband by witchcraft. So there's no love between them whatsoever. But our story starts in this little cottage, deep within the Forest of Pendle, known simply as Malkin Tower. No one knows the exact location, but they believe it was in an area called Blackhoe, which is just beneath Pendle Hill. Living in that cottage was indeed Demdike herself, 85, her daughter Elizabeth Devise, and her three children, James, Alison, and Jeanette Devise. Alison was about 14 years of age, and she had a walk along the length of Pendle on the 18th of March, 1612. She had the misfortune, and it really was misfortune, of meeting a Halifax peddler called John Law. When I say peddler, John Law was basically a walking salesman, a large pack in his back full of 1612 luxuries. He would go from village to village selling his wares. He was also a bit like a walking newspaper, because he would give information to each individual village, from the next village to the next, etc. When young Alison Devise saw him, she'd have looked at him like a walking sweet shop, really, and she begged of him, "Oh, please, sir, you can spare just a couple of pins to pin my clothing together, sir. Get away with you. I'm not taking me pack off for you, lass. You've got no money. You're no use to me. Please, sir, you can spare just a couple of pins, sir. Get away with you," shouted John Law. According to John Law, the Halifax peddler, out of the mist, out of the heather, appeared a huge black dog with snarling white teeth and glowing red eyes. And the dog sat next to Alison. The dog turned to look at Alison, and the dog talked. "Alison, I can lame him for you." Lame him, she screamed. John Law felt this terrible pain on his left arm, left leg, and collapsed in agony beneath the shadow of Pendle Hill on the Cone to Jordan Road. He lay there for 5 long hours, writhing in agony. The kind people of the town of Cone, they could see him, and they brought him to an old alehouse to recuperate. There the landlord spoon-fed him, cleaned him, and as Law's voice returned 3 days later, he shouted, "I've been cursed! There's a witch in the forest, a young lass with a dog. I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She's in league with devil. Please send letters back to my family." A series of letters was sent from Cone back to the city of Halifax, and John Law's eldest son, Abraham, received the first letter. "Yeah, me father's in trouble, better go and collect him." He set off from Halifax, West Yorkshire, and made his way into the market town of Cone. He walked into the old alehouse and saw his father in a twisted and contorted state. "Father, what's happened to you, man? You look terrible." "Abraham, I've been cursed. I met a young lass with a dog. She's a witch. The dog talked, and she talked to the dog. She's cursed me, lad. I can't move my left arm. I can't move my left leg. She's a witch. I want you, lad, to go and find her. Bring her here. Reverse the curse." Abraham must have been quite a brave lad. He set up into the forest of Pendle for the many twisting pathways and came across this hovel of a building called Malkin Tower. He hammered on the door. The door opened. He was met by James Device and a horrible, obnoxious aroma. "Where's Alison Devine? I want to see her." "She's in here, sir," said James. Alison came to the door. "Right, lass, you're coming with me. My father wants to see you." She protested her innocence, but was dragged for the forest of Pendle and down into the market town of Cone and into the old alehouse where she made eye contact with John Law. John Law looked up from his sick bed. It's you, you're the witch. You cursed me, lass. That dog you had, I heard it talk. You're in league with devil, aren't you?" This 14-year-old girl, on bended knees, with tears streaming down her cheeks, begged and begged and begged forgiveness. She had no idea. She just admitted to a state capital offence of witchcraft. And strange enough, John Law, the Halifax peddler, is actually about to forgive her, but not his son Abraham. "Oh no, we'll have you for this. I'm going to go and get magistrate." And in doing so, he opened what we now call the 1612 Pendle Witch Trials. The local magistrate was called Roger Nowell. He lived in the village of Reed near Burnley. He had his book of demonology. He was fully aware of the king's paranoia. He also knew if he could actually incriminate this young girl, he was indeed going to curry favour with none other than the King of England personally. So therefore, Alison was arrested. She is brought to Reed Hall, Burnley, and for the second time inside 24 hours, she bursts into tears and begs forgiveness. But she gave Roger Nowell a lot more information. "My grandmother, Demdike, she's a witch. So's Bessie Chattox and her daughter Anne Redfern. We have familiars." "Familiars," said Roger Nowell. "Yes, sir, dogs. Tib, Ball, Fancy, Dandy. These dogs belong to the four of us, sir. They've come to different times of our lives and they've talked to us. They've told us to fashion clay pictures." "Clay pictures," said Roger Nowell. "Yes, sir. Dolls made of clay, but with human hair and human teeth, which we have taken from New Church Cemetery, sir. The dogs then tell us to fashion the clay pictures, select victims, and we crumble the clay picture over the fire, sir, and people die, sir." Roger Nowell was actually delighted. He wasn't scared. He was delighted. He had a confession, and he knew he was going to curry favour with the King of England personally. So therefore, he gave orders that Demdike, Chattox, and Redfern should be arrested. They are brought straight to Reed Hall, Burnley, where they meet young Alison Device, and this huge argument erupts amongst the four of them. Remember, there is no love between Demdike and Chattox. In fact, a deep, deep hatred. The blame goes around the table twice and comes back twice again. They try and blame each other, but in doing so, the four of them actually self-incriminate, and they are sent from the Forest of Bowland to the city of Lancaster, where they are thrown into what we call the Well Tower, this very, very deep, deep underground dungeon that is still there to this very day. And they are then chained to the floor in total darkness and put on what we call starvation rations. In the meantime, back at the little cottage in the Forest of Pendle, Elizabeth Devise is rather concerned about her mother Demdike. She's very concerned about her daughter Alison, and she organises on Good Friday what has gone down in history as the Good Friday meeting, where all these other so-called witches gathered in the Forest of Pendle. It must have been a bit like a scene from a Shakespeare play, as Alison's brother James slaughtered the sheep from the fell. They dined on fresh mutton. They got a large cooking vessel called a cauldron and lit a fire beneath it, and the black savory liquid inside began to bubble and steam. And into that black bubbling liquid went, apparently, crushed powdered human teeth, the odd clay pitcher, and we are told the odd human scalp. The whole idea of the Good Friday meeting, apparently, was to get a potion together to blow the gates of Lancaster City Castle open and rescue Demdike, Chattox and Redfern. But nothing happened. What did happen is word of the Good Friday meeting reached the ears of Roger Nowell, and he gave orders that every single person who had attended the Good Friday meeting should be arrested immediately. When word filtered into the Forest of Pendle of imminent arrests, 3 people thought, hey, there's no way we're hanging around. Christopher Howgate, his wife Barbara, and Isabel Sygroves. They left the Forest of Pendle, and in doing so, they saved their lives. The ones that were successfully arrested from being at the Good Friday meeting were Jeanette Preston of Gisborne, West Yorkshire, Catherine Hewitt and Alice Gray of the market town of Cone, Elizabeth Devise, James Devise, and little Jeanette Devise from Malkin Tower, John and Jane Bulcock, a mother and son, and the biggest star of them all, Alice Nutter of Roughly. They are all sent to Lancaster with the exception of the 2 Jeanettes. Jeanette Preston comes from Gisborne, West Yorkshire, so therefore she is sent to the city of York. Her husband goes with her. Villagers go with her, and they beg for her release. The judges in York look a little bit sheepish, really, and they tell her husband that the king has signed her death warrant. She was found guilty of the murder of her employer, Mr Thomas Lister. He'd been very seriously ill. He had a high temperature. She was nursing him. He screamed out, "You're a witch, you're cursing me." He would have had a very high temperature and probably a very high fever. And he died that night, and she wrapped his body in a clean white sheet, ready for burial. And 2 days before the burial, she touched the sheeting, and some fresh blood came from the sheet. This was classed as witchcraft. She made a plea of not guilty in York, but was found guilty by the jury in the city of York, and became the very, very first of the Pendle witches to be executed on the 27th of July, 1612, at a street in York, which is now known as Wapmar Gate, at the end of the shambles. The other Jeanette, the little girl that lived at Malkin Tower, whilst her grandmother Demdike, her mother Elizabeth, her brother James and sister Alison had been sent to the city of Lancaster, she had been sent to live with the local magistrate. And for the first time in her life, she had 3 meals a day, a nice warm bed to sleep in, and also very nice food to eat. She'd never known such luxury in her life. She had no idea, but she was going to play a very, very important role in the prosecution of her entire family. Roger Nowell writes to the king personally, King James I, and receives a letter back saying, "Mr. Nowell, sir, I congratulate you on the successful arrest of these evil, wicked people. I'm going to send the following people from the city of London: James Altham, Edmund Bromley, and a young gentleman called Thomas Potts. He'll record everything that's said." And that's really why we're here now, because Thomas Potts released a book in 1613 called The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire, which became probably the only eyewitness account we've actually got. From reading the book on many occasions, it does seem to be very, very biased, particularly towards women. That's the impression I certainly get. What we do know, the prosecution were all male, and the jury were all male, because in 1612, for some strange reason, women are not permitted to be the owners of a brain. The trials began in the city of Lancaster way back in August 1612. Demdike, Elizabeth Southern, that was her real name, she dies before the trials begin, probably due to the harsh treatment that she's been meted out in the cells at Lancaster, lying on a cold, wet floor on a starvation diet. In her absence, her own granddaughter gives evidence against her. She's picked up by Roger Noel, the local magistrate, and placed on top of a desk. And there she tells the jury how these dogs, Tib, Bull, Fancy, Dandy, had arrived at Malkin Tower, and how she'd seen the dog actually suckle from the flesh of her grandmother by biting her under her left arm and taking blood from her, and how the dogs had talked and told them to make clay pictures. Her mother was in court that day, and her mother shouted, "Stop it, Jeanette, stop it! You don't know what you're saying, stop it!" Have my mother removed from the court, sir. She's upsetting me. Well, because Demdike has died, she can't testify, but her own granddaughter confirms that she used a dog called Bull that gave her special powers and murdered the following people: Mr. Rafe Asherton of Downham, the child of Richard Baldwin, a miller from Burnley, and the murder of Henry Mitten of Roughlee. Because she's dead, she can't testify, but her own granddaughter confirms that she is guilty of these murders. The next person brought up from the cells is the 85-year-old Bessie Chattox, Anne Whittle as we know her. She was in a terrible, terrible state of health and described by Thomas Potts really as a skeleton in rags. The poor woman, through no fault of her own, has been lying in her own waste. She's wearing the same clothes she was arrested in. And it said the courts were not very pleasant that day with the aroma, through no fault of her own, of course. There she is found guilty of the murder of John Device, that's Demdike's husband. She's found guilty of the murder of Anne and Robert Nutter and Anne and Hugh Moore by having a dog called Fancy that came to see her in Newchurch in Pendle, in the form of a little boy wearing a brown coat that changed from a little boy into a dog, and the dog became her familiar, Fancy, that gave her special powers. She's in such a bad state of health, she can hardly talk, and her teeth are chattering away, hence the name Chattox. But the little girl on the table confirms what the prosecution have just put forward, and they believe that a little girl cannot be manipulated. And as a result, Anne Whittle is found guilty of the murder of those 5 people. The next person to be brought into court is young Alison Device, little Jeanette's sister. But as it happened, Alison was convinced that she had indeed lamed John Law, the Halifax peddler, who was in court that day. And James Alton, the senior judge, said, "Could you please reverse the curse on Mr. Law, who's over here?" "I can't, sir. Only my grandmother can, sir, and she is dead, sir." So she incriminated herself. Her brother's brought in, James, and he's in a very, very bad state of health. There are 2 warders with him that have to keep him upright because he's lapsing in and out of consciousness due to severe malnutrition. The jury are actually wondering whether he's been tortured because his face is black and blue, and he really does look to be in a very bad state of health. But as it happened, according to Thomas Potts, he was classed, in his own words, as a dim wit, a lad of very, very low intelligence, and also he wouldn't be able to read or write, etc. But he more or less convicted himself by telling the court, if you do go to Malkin Tower and start digging, you will find clay pictures. He openly admitted to the murder of Anne Townley of Townley Hall, Burnley, the murder of John Duckworth, and the murder of Hugh and Blaise Hargreaves by cursing them, by having the dog called Tib that gave him special powers, and the dog talked to him. He would fashion clay pictures, and the little girl still standing on the table confirmed this. So he actually incriminated himself. His mother was then brought in, Elizabeth. She was in a very bad state of health, like everyone else, really. One eye looked up, one eye looked down. They called her Squinting Lizzie, actually. She's probably blind in one eye, really. She's in a state of confusion. Her own daughter standing on the table incriminating her, and she just seems to accept the whole situation, really. But she is found guilty of the murder of John and Josh Robinson by witchcraft, and also aiding the murder of Henry Mitten of Roughlee. Catherine Hewitt came in next. She came from Cone. and she is found guilty of the murder of Anne Foldscombe by witchcraft. She makes a plea of not guilty, but the little girl on the table, Jeanette Device, tells the court how she'd been at the Good Friday meeting and told the court where she'd been sitting. Of course, it was believed that a little girl could not be manipulated, and Jeanette sealed her fate. Then came John and Jane Bulcock and Alice Nutter. These three were totally different to the rest of them, really. John and Jane were hard-working farmers, and there's been a lot of controversy about them both, really, about land disputes. We do know that Alice Nutter, she lived at Roughly Hall, a rather beautiful, beautiful building, which is still there to this very day. She had lost her husband, she was a widower, and she took over the estate that he ran. And it's said that she did, in fact, take rents off the farmers that farmed on her land. And John and Jane had been to see her and complained about someone stealing sheep and cattle and moving fencing back. It has been said, never confirmed or denied, but the fact she was a woman, Roger Noel wouldn't talk to her. And so she made alternative efforts to get the land dispute sorted. And she had done. And as a result, this embarrassed Roger Noel. Now, he's got the trump card up his sleeve. He's got the little girl on the table, Jeanette Device. And he says in front of the courts, Jeanette, these three people here, John and Jane Bulcock, Alice Nutter, were they at your home, Malkin Tower, on Good Friday in the Forest of Pendle? They were, sir. A look of shock and horror came across John and Jane and Alice's face as they realised on the evidence of a little girl they're being found guilty of witchcraft. The senior judges, Altham and Bromley, they thought, well, this woman seems to be quite a woman of good nature. She seems to be quite intelligent, really. Let's have an identity parade. And they brought up some more prisoners from down below, mixed them all together. But the little girl, Jeanette, pointed John and Jane and Alice out once again as being at the Good Friday meeting. And the jury believed every word the little girl said, and they were found guilty of the murder of Jean Mead of Harrogate and also the murder of Henry Mitten, once again of Roughly. What we do know is Alice would not have needed to beg. She's found guilty of aiding Alison Device and her grandmother Demdike in the murder of Henry Mitten of Roughly because he wouldn't give them a penny. What we do know is Alice Nutter would not need to beg. However, she is found guilty of his murder and she's found guilty of attending the Good Friday meeting at Malkin Tower. The Pendle witches were all executed on the 20th of August, 1612, in front of huge crowds in Lancaster City. They had to climb to what we call the pillory, a horrible place of execution. We are told that they stood on trestles, they had ropes around their necks, their hands were tied behind their backs, and the head governor, Mr Thomas Cavell, he gave the orders that the trestles should be kicked up underneath them. These people did not hang, they literally strangled to death. It was a very, very traumatic and painful death. We are told that James Altham and Edmund Bromley, the two circuit judges, were knighted. Roger Noel is made the High Sheriff of Lancashire, and Thomas Potts writes his book, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire, which would later earn him quite a lot of money. Do I think there were witches? Well, I personally don't. I think the culprits here are definitely the King of England and a local magistrate that wanted to curry favour with him, and also a rather overzealous all-male jury. That's my opinion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Simon. I mean, I've heard that story numerous, but it's still, it's still a fascinating story, and the way you tell it, it draws you in. You can't help but just sit and be drawn into it. And as you say, were they guilty? I don't think they were. As I say, we've covered the Pendle witches quite a few times, and I think, as you say, the guilty ones were the people in charge, and it was all done for greed, to gain favour, as you said, in the eyes of the king. Roger Knowles had an extra wee, I don't know, something in his bow or something, with Alice Nutter, because obviously he'd lost, to a woman, and this was taboo. And so to say it was a matter of pride as well. Basically, that's what I think.
Yes, yeah,
it
yeah.
was more pride to lose to a woman because, as you say, back then women weren't entitled to a voice or nothing.
Very, very true. Very, very true. That Scott. Way back in 2012, myself, Pendle Borough Council, Visit England, Marketing Branch, we all got together. We thought we need to do something for Alice, and we got enough money from the lottery people to unveil a statue to her. But we insisted that her back was facing Lancaster. She's in chains, and she has a look of total innocence on her face. And the statue has become very much a symbol of female rights. And I personally would put Alice in the same league as that magnificent woman, Emmeline Pankhurst, the fabulous Edith Cavell, the brilliant Grace Darling, because she lost her life nothing to do with witchcraft, but I believe because she had a brain she wasn't allowed to use.
Brain and a voice. As you say, the statue is facing away for Lancaster. And I think it's one of these statues that's known worldwide. As soon as somebody sees it, they know, who it is and what it signifies, And we've been to Pendle and we've been to Newchurch to St Mary's.
Yes.
You and I have spoken about this before, Simon. I know there's still the conspiracy theories, is Alice buried at Newchurch?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I think that's something that will never be answered, basically.
No.
When we were there, it's quite humbling. It's very, very surreal. Just standing there at the grave, knowing you've seen it that many times in photographs, documentaries, etc. And to be actually standing there. Kate seems to have disappeared now as well. No, there she's back.
I'm here, sorry.
But I know Kate's got some questions for you. I've got one for you just before I hand over to Kate. We're doing a show next month. It's called What If? And basically it's how would society be today if certain things in history hadn't took place? Quick example, if Henry VIII hadn't met Anne Boleyn, will he still have split for the Catholic Church? Would we have Catholics, Protestants? That kind of thing.
Yes.
Another thing I want to cover is the King James's book and his fear of witches.
Oh, yes.
If his bride-to-be hadn't been caught in that storm, I think that's what kicked it all off. He said that witches were responsible. They were out to kill him and her. Do you think the witch trials would have went ahead if that storm hadn't occurred? Does that make sense?
He was absolutely paranoid, wasn't he? But I think the king also was an ardent Protestant. And in that part of the world, even nowadays, Catholicism in the Ribble Valley is very, very strong, really strong. And all these landowners in East Lancs were all Catholics. So the king had his suspicion on them. But I do believe, Scott, he also blamed the gunpowder plot, the 1605, not only on the Catholics, but on witchcraft as well. He believed that Catholicism and witchcraft were actually allied. And he was paranoid about the whole thing, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Of course, obviously, King James, it was Queen Elizabeth that sort of appointed him. She wanted him to be king because of what had happened to Mary Queen of Scots.
Oh, yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
And so I don't know if she's seen it. It was like maybe a guilty conscience on behalf of Elizabeth for what she'd done to Mary. Maybe, but I know Kate's bursting to ask you a few things, so I'm going to let her fire in. And so yours, Kate.
Thank you, Scott. But honestly, ask your questions as well, Scott. I don't want to just take over, but thank you. I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Simon. I'm a massive fan of yours. I think that the way that you tell these very important stories that need to be told is just incredible. You have a real gift with your vocabulary, your knowledge, even the way that you tell the stories with the voices, and honestly, it's just captivating and it's absolutely fascinating. And I'm not the only one saying this. I don't know if you're aware, Simon, but you have a massive fan base on YouTube. Are you aware of this?
Not really, Kate. All I can say is that I thoroughly enjoy what I'm doing. I left school at the age of 15 with no A levels, no O levels whatsoever, and
Right.
I had a stint in the army for a while. I've worked in factories and then worked in grounds maintenance for the local authority. And in 1996, I discovered myself, really, mainly thanks to a man called Mr Tony Mercer, who was a tour guide in York. And I went on a ghost walk in York with him, and I became bitten by the bug. I came back to my hometown in Clitheroe. I got a book from the library. I looked at the history of the town, and I also met people with ghostly tales, and I mixed them all together. And I found, Kate, for the very, very first time in my life, I was getting a thing called job satisfaction. And it was nice to actually do something right for a change, instead of having that horrible Monday morning feeling of going into a factory or doing something you weren't very happy in. But I do love the tours I've done, and I get a lot of pleasure from them. And I found
I
that,
mean,
I actually found my own forte, if you know what I mean.
yeah, I mean, it shows. You can see how much passion that you have for the history, and it's just amazing, especially for generation, kind of my generation and younger generations, because we're not told stories like this, and I think it's so important, and you are definitely one of the best people to do that, to pass on these stories. And just thank you
You're
for
very
sharing
kind,
this.
Kate. I must say that those kind words mean a lot to me. They really do. I'm looking forward very, very much to this Sunday, because I've got a minibus tour in Pendle Witch
Oh,
Country, and that starts at 11 o'clock this Sunday, the 22nd. And we'll go to all those villages. We'll start from the Heritage Centre at Barrowford. We go to Newchurch, Blackow, Barley, Downham, and indeed Clitheroe, visiting all those areas. And it gives people the opportunity to actually stand on the very soil that these people lived all those years ago. Of
wow.
course, there's a two-course meal, which is quite nice. But what I'm also looking forward
That's
to very, very
lovely.
much indeed is Halloween, because I've got a slot at a place called the Holmes Mill Bistro, which is like a fabulous hotel with quite a nice stage. And it'll be quite nice to bring some stories from across Great Britain, ghostly tales from across Great Britain, to an audience,
Right.
which
Yeah.
I don't need to worry about the rain. I don't need to worry about the wind and the weather, because a lot of my tours are outside. But I'm looking forward to that very much indeed.
That sounds absolutely amazing. I mean, I wish I could go. I live in the States near Chicago, so unfortunately I won't be able to go anytime
Right.
soon, but that does sound incredible. I want you to know, because of your collaborations with Exploring with Fighters, Exploring with Josh, the Overnight channel, your
Oh yes.
presence on your presence on YouTube is incredible. Very recently, 2 weeks ago, there was a video that went up by Side Eye Guy, and I want to tell you some of the things that he said about you, because it's 100% true. So the first thing that he said about you is, he is straight up amazing. Simon is like the uncle we all wish we had. No matter how great you think your uncle is, he ain't got shit on Simon. Like, you are like incredible. And then he also says, he really does bring the history to life. He recreates the story so well. He does voices from different historical people and acts out the situations they're in really well. So much so that I get really angry every time he gets interrupted by the YouTubers.
Oh gosh.
And I just wanted to say one last thing about the YouTube stuff is, it's such a shame that certain channels didn't put any contact details for Simon in the description of the video. Simon needs his own YouTube channel, and I totally agree, because you are not credited enough in these videos. And my question is there going to be a Simon Entwistle YouTube channel? Please say yes.
Kate, I'd love to say yes, really, but one of the problems I do have is I'm not a very technical person, which is probably why you can't even see me right now, actually. Technology does actually baffle me. I'd love to do an
Sure.
audio book. I'd love to do an audio book.
Yes.
But again, it's having the technology to do it. I can record stories,
Right.
of course, but I wouldn't know how to put them onto, shall we say, an Amazon book. If
Right.
someone could help me with that, I'd be very grateful.
I definitely have first dibs. I will help you as much as I can.
God bless. Thank you.
100%. That's amazing. Incredible. I do have a few questions for you, Simon, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I wanted to ask, a lot of the YouTubers, I think, are getting this wrong because they go to, there's a lot of controversy about this, where they go to the graveyard where Alice Nutter is supposedly buried, her grave, which is just outside the church, right?
Yes.
On holy ground, and they keep talking about the skull, and they say, oh, it signifies that she's a witch, but that's not true, is it?
Well, firstly, Alice Nutter was a convicted witch, as found
Right.
guilty by King James's courts in Lancaster, August 1612. Therefore, I don't think her body could be actually buried in consecrated ground. That's my personal feelings. There are some legends that her son Miles may have paid the jailer to have her body brought back, but there again, he'd have had to have permission from the reverend to have the body actually interned. As far as the skull and crossbones go, from what I understand, that's actually Victorian graffiti. From what I understand, actually Victorian graffiti, because the Victorians did believe that Malkin Tower was actually a tower. And there is a folly overlooking Blacko that looks brilliant, actually, against the shadow of Pendle Hill, but that's very much a Victorian folly. But they call it Malkin Tower because it looks like it. And I think the Victorians had a great imagination, but I believe that that was actually Victorian graffiti, if you will, that's been placed on top of the grave. We do know that members of the Nutter family are buried there. Ellen's buried there, and John, her children. But I personally, I could be wrong, but I personally don't believe that she's buried there.
Yeah, no, that's really good to know. Yeah.
Can I jump? Sorry, Kate. Can I jump? I've got a comment to put up, but just to clear up the skull and crossbones thing. Somebody's already put it up. The skull and it's quite prominent up in Scotland. The skull and cross. I can't remember the proper name for it, but it's a sign of mortality. Somebody's put it. Facebook users put it up as well. Basically, what it means is it doesn't matter your stature in life. You know, whether you're rich or poor, whatever. Death comes to us all. When you go into places like Greyfriars, Canongate, etc., you'll see the skull and crossbones on many a headstone. People used to think it was a sign of a pirate's grave, which it isn't.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what it means. It's a reminder of our own mortality. As Eileen Murray from Phantom Seekers Paranormal. So that's what it means. It doesn't matter who you were in life, rich, poor, death comes to us all. Basically, that's what it means up here. Might have a different meaning in England. I've got no idea. But there's a comment here, the Facebook user I'd like your opinions on. I believe many had PMDD, which I have now. 1 in 20 women actually suffer from it, and they were accused of being witches and slaughtered by the church and the feudal system. Because of hysteria as well, because I can confirm it does indeed affect the brain chemicals from fluctuations in hormones from a monthly cycle. I've no idea about that one, Facebook user. I don't know if Simon or Kate can shed some light on that at all.
It's very hard to say, really. We do know that these people living in the Forest of Pendle in the early 17th century, they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they wouldn't know what day it was, they lived off the land. They were probably easy targets to be, shall we say, dare I say it, falsely accused. because they'd be so scared. Being taken from the forest of Pendle to Lancaster City Castle would be a bit like you and I being thrown into the streets of New York. A huge shock to our eyes, really, and they wouldn't be used to anything like that. They'd have probably admitted to anything, really. One question I do get asked a lot is, according to Thomas Potter's book, there were 4 dogs: Tib, Ball, Fancy, and Dandy. And I often wondered what happened to the dogs when the accused are sent to Lancaster. What actually happened to them? They seem to just disappear, fade away, really.
That's sort of interesting.
Yeah, that was a very interesting comment. I really feel that women were so oppressed in the past, and what men didn't understand about women, even how our bodies function, which is really remarkable what our bodies can do. Like, no shade to men, but come on, I mean, we have to go through a lot. They just easily said, oh, she must be a witch, because that's not normal, or what they class as normal. So I think there was a lot of accusations back then simply because of how our bodies functioned, and it's really sad. And there's just the inequality of it was just horrendous throughout the years.
Our women really did, get a raw deal, even before Pendle. If you go back again, Henry VIII's court, there was women there, but the women in Henry VIII's court were there as objects, basically. For the men were the bosses. Obviously, the king, he was the big chief. But the men kind of ran the show, and they could have their pick of whatever. They were like cattle, basically, for want of a better word, in the court, and that was their job, just to be there for the men for whatever or whenever.
Why do you think, Simon, that women were treated so badly? Is it religious reasons that Adam had to give his own flesh or bones to create a woman, so we were seen as second best? What's your theory on it?
I think at that period of time there's a lot of superstition, really, and probably fear as well. When you look at Emmeline Pankhurst, she was classed as a terrorist, and all she wanted to do was just vote. The poor woman was actually put in prison and force-fed and treated like a terrorist, treated like a criminal. And all she wanted to do was just vote. For some strange reason, I think men can be a bit scared of women. I don't know why, because I've always looked on male and female as being totally equal, really. And I'm a huge fan of people like Emmeline Pankhurst and Grace Darling and Edith Cavell, of course, and indeed Alice Nutter. I think it could be a fear, really, because it's definitely discrimination, isn't it, really? And sadly, you do see in the Muslim countries where women are, dare I say, treated as second-class citizens there, really, which I think is a bit unfair, but there again, it's their religion, isn't it?
Still a long way to go for equality, but
yeah,
definitely. I wanted to ask a question, actually, about how much do you believe in that story about the dogs? Do you think there were dogs? Do you think they would talk to the dogs, and the dogs could talk? That kind of the familiars, right? The story of the familiars.
Kate, that is an absolutely fantastic question. My personal opinion, and this is my personal opinion, I get the impression that a lot of the accusations have been brought up by Potts and indeed Roger Nowell. I think a lot of the evidence against them just could have been fabricated, because we're looking at peasants here. We're looking at people that can't read. They don't know what day it is. They don't know what time it is. But also you've got this hatred between Demdike and Chattox. So they may have even believed that they had special powers, and they could have just incriminated each other through hatred, really. What I have been told is that both women were experts when it came to herbal remedies. And of course, all medicines come from plants. Both women had lived to 85 And people believe that they may have lived for such a long period of time because they knew all about the life-giving properties of various plants, etc. But I personally, I think that they may have been framed. That's my personal opinion, Kate. But according to Potts' book, no. But we do know a lot of his royalties went to the man who stopped Guy Fawkes actually lighting the blue touch paper, a chap called Thomas Cavett or Kivett. So he was very, very loyal to the king. And of course, it was Thomas Potts would not want to upset the king whatsoever. He was definitely on the king's side. That's why, because there was no defence council. And so any words that could be thrown at these people to incriminate them, I think they would have found it very hard to deny it, really. And you've got the little girl standing on the desk there, little Jeanette Device, who may, dare I say it, been groomed by Roger Nowell, because she did incriminate her entire family. And we are told that after the actual executions, Nowell said goodbye. And we know she survived because 3 years later, she's rearrested on a charge of witchcraft. And of course, because of her family reputation, it's taken very seriously. A young boy called Edmund Robinson said he'd been walking for the Forest of Pendle and seen her commit acts of witchcraft. Of course, with that reputation, it's taken very, very seriously, and she's arrested. The poor girl is sent to Lancaster. She is stripped naked, and they look for marks on her body. She's then sent to the City of London, where the same thing happens again. Practitioners have a look at her. They can't find what's called witching marks or birthmarks on her body. Up to London, down to Lancaster. And after 2.5 years of travelling up and down the country, this young boy Robinson said, actually, I made it all up. I didn't see her do anything. So he could say that witchcraft or the superstition surrounding it absolutely destroyed that young girl's life and, of course, her family as well. But Robinson's accusations, he admitted, he made up. So who knows? A lot of the accusations against them, because they would have been very, very limited intelligence. They wouldn't know how to defend themselves, really. And if they're accused and you're half starved, you might just accept your own fate, really.
Yeah, that's awful.
Which, Simon, would you think turned the tide? Early 1700s, things started to change with witch trials, basically. I think the king at the time was King Charles, and I think something twigged in his mind, well, maybe there are no witches. I think it was around about the 1730, 33 mark, something like that. I might be wrong. I mean, history isn't 100%, but I know that the witch trials did die out. Would you think turned the tide in that kind of respect?
Well, I suppose as we got older, superstition would probably finish a lot more. But certainly in Salem, Massachusetts, which would be about 80 years later, they did use the same method at the trials in Salem against the Salem witches, and they used a child witness again. It's believed that a child could not be manipulated, and the child would always tell the truth. But for all we know, they could have been groomed and coaxed into bringing this information forward. But certainly they did use the Pendle trials as a plate for the Salem witch trials.
Somebody's got a comment up here. Someone would disagree with me, but I definitely think there would be some kind of torture involved in the Pendle trial to receive the convincing confessions. Yeah. I kind of agree with that because I know, not 100%, but I know the Witchcraft Act in Scotland compared to the English one was different. In Scotland, torture wasn't allowed. In England, it was. Even though in Scotland, they probably, ignored the rules, basically. I dare say, I mean, they were arrested in the March time.
Yes, yeah.
And executed in August, so you're talking...
That's correct.
4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And over that time, I dare say there would have been some kind of torture involved, what it was, no idea.
Yeah, I should imagine, Scott, being chained to a floor in total darkness and on starvation rations is a form of torture. We do know that when they were brought up in front of the courts, they were all suffering from malnutrition and they'd all lost a huge amount of weight. and they would have been in a terrible state of health. There's no two ways about it, really. Which, of course, is a form of torture, really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Aye, then sleep deprivation, and
Yes. Yeah.
that I think that's probably one of the worst kind of forms of torture there is. To be deprived of sleep, especially for a great length of time. I've got one more question, and then Kate can have you back. The little Jeanette, she was taken in by Roger Knowles, Reed Hall, all the splendour, the meals, etc. What do you think was going through her head standing in that courtroom? I know she's got a family on one side. She's got Roger Knowles, who's groomed her basically, unawares to her, on the other side. He's expecting her to say one thing. Her family's expecting her to, say they're innocent. It must have been a horrendous time for little Jeanette, don't you think?
Yeah. I think for a little girl of that age, it would have been. But you imagine living in the squalor at Malkin Tower, which sounds great, doesn't it, really? But it would have been a one-roomed limestone hovel with the wind that would howl through it. Clothing would be perhaps just one item of clothing. Food would be very, very rare and scarce. So to go to a lovely warm place like Reed Hall and have a lovely warm bed, 3 meals a day, nice clothes to wear, and of course Noel may, for all we know, sat down and said, "No, Jeanette, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, and I want you to say this." And of course she was there 4 months before the trials began. So that's enough time to really enjoy her new lifestyle. And for all we know, Noel may have said, "You can stay here forever, don't worry." Of course, we know that didn't happen.
Aye, she was discarded. She was, right, you served your purpose, you're done. Cheerio. Do you think, sorry, Kate, this is final but honest. Do you think if she hadn't been introduced to Reed Hall and all the splendour, as you say, Malcolm Tower, everybody would imagine a 2 or 3 story building, but it was a kind of hovel, as you say. Do you think if she hadn't been introduced to that style, the lifestyle at Reed Hall, the trials might have went a different way?
It's sheer speculation, really, Scott, but it may be. The impression I get, and is that she was probably groomed. That's the impression I get. But there again, because none of us were around in the early part of the 17th century, we have to rely entirely on Potts's book. But I think a lot of Potts's book is pretty biased towards women. Actually, I really do.
And then, of course, Roger Knowles, he would have been rubbing his hands, at the end of it,
Oh, he's curried favour the King of England, Scott. He's curried favour. He's been made the High Sheriff of Lancashire, and he's got many, many admirers now for bringing these people to trial. So he's admired greatly throughout the whole of Great Britain. The 2 circuit judges, Edmund Bromley and James Oldham, they are knighted. Potts writes his book, of course, which earned him a lot of money. So they all did rather well out of the deaths of these poor, unfortunate people that were probably in the wrong place at the wrong time in the wrong century.
Exactly. So, carry on, Kate.
Thank you. I just have one last question, actually. And as an award-winning ghost tour guide and tour guide in general, Simon, I just wanted to ask you, do you believe in ghosts and the paranormal? Because I'm not sure that you've actually really said. I'm curious to know.
I have never ever seen a ghost, Kate. I can't lie to you, but I met many people who have, including my own father, and his story is one of the finest ghost stories I've ever heard in my life. And it's have we got enough time to mention this, Scott? Okie dokie.
I forgot I was muted.
Okay.
Carry on, Simon.
Thank you. We'll turn the clock back to 1960, Kate. I was 5 years old. My mum and dad, they bought a beautiful house in what we call South Cumbria. And I remember arriving in the Pickford's vehicle on this frosty December day and looking at this 3-story gorgeous house in its own grounds. Behind it, you have the Lake District Mountains, the Kent Estuary, and the air was beautiful and sweet. Mum and Dad made the beds up very quickly for myself, my sister and my brother, and we all fell into a deep sleep. They continued working, taking cutlery inside the house, moving furniture around. And around 1 o'clock in the morning, they made their bed. And the last job they needed to do, really, was to put up any curtains, because it was a country house, there's no neighbours. My dad said he got into bed and he turned over, and there was bright, bright moonlight coming into the bedroom. He then heard the sounds of tiny footsteps, and he thought, it must be me or my sister. The door of the bedroom slowly opened, and in came a cocker spaniel, a liver and white cocker spaniel. And he thought, how's that dog got in here? He got out of bed to walk towards the creature in the corner of the bedroom to grab the collar to take it downstairs. As he did so, his hand went straight through it. He made a second attempt, and his hand went straight for the dog. The dog then turned and looked at the window and shimmered and disappeared. My father took a deep breath. At the same time, my mother woke up from a deep sleep and said, I've had a strange dream. There's a man outside, as clear as day, in Victorian clothing, with a dog lead in his hand, pointing up at our top bedroom window. They put two and two together. Now, they never told me until I was 15 years old. And I found the story fascinating. My dad sold the house in 1973, and it broke my heart because I grew to love the building so much. I went to primary school there, had Christmases there, birthdays there, and loved the house and still do. And as I left for the last time, I left with a lump in my throat. But something very, very spooky happened only 7 years ago, when my wife and I went on what's called a Mediterranean cruise. Thoroughly enjoyed the cruise. At night time, you could put your dinner jacket on, go down to the restaurants. And as I did so, I looked across at two tables. There was a young lady that kept smiling at me. And I thought, I really cannot be that good looking. But as it happened, she knew me. She was called Louise. And she was the cruise director on that vessel called the Oceana. She booked all the acts and all the lectures, etc. She came across the table and said, Simon, I've been on one or two of your tours. I quite like your stories. Have you ever thought about doing a PowerPoint show in this vessel? I said, well, would people like ghosts? Would they like murders? Would they like mysteries? You'd be surprised, she said. I'm going to give you an email address. So I said to my wife, hey, that we might get a free cruise out of this, you know. So I got back to England and I contacted P&O. I sent them my CV. And within 3 days, to my delight, I had I could go to Sussex in the south of England or up to Cumbria, which I knew very, very well. And that's the nearest county to where I live anyway. So I telephoned Maureen, the cruise director, and she said, Simon, bring your laptop. I've got a projector. Just bring your laptop and your stories, and I will audition you. See if you're capable of doing the job, really. So she gave me a sat-nav code and said, my house is rather hard to find. I did say, well, I know South Cumbria quite well, really. Oh, you won't find my house, she said. She gave me the sat-nav code, and I set off, and I found myself driving through the city of Lancaster, then up to South Lakeland, past my old primary school, past my old secondary modern school, then over this beautiful limestone outcrop in the centre of the forest, then down the back of it, and up a very, very familiar driveway to the house that my dad had sold in 1973. Maureen, the cruise director, had bought it. When I got there, I was smacked. I looked up at the familiar three-story building. Maureen came to the door and said, come on, Simon, we need to get this audition done now. You look a bit jaded, she said. Well, Maureen, I know you won't believe me, but I used to live here. No, she said. I did, honestly. But on my laptop, I had pictures of my youth, and it confirmed it. She said, let's have a cup of tea. I sat down in the front room, and I looked at the familiar doorknob, I looked at the familiar fireplace and the ceiling, and she made her way into the kitchen and came back with a tray with a teapot, milk and sugar. And I then told her about the ghostly dog, the liver and white spaniel. Her eyes widened. She dropped the tray and the teapot smashed on the floor. She sat down next to me and gasping for breath and said, oh, Simon, my brother lives in London. Every Christmas he spends Christmas with us. The very first Christmas he spent with us, he would have had what would have been your mother and father's bedroom. He said in the early hours of the morning, the door opened and in came a liver and white cocker spaniel. I looked at the ceiling and said, thank you, Dad. My dad died way back in 1982, but it just confirmed his story. So yes, Kate, I do believe in ghosts.
Oh my gosh, thank you
That's
so much
amazing.
for telling us that story. That is insane. What a coincidence. That's just uncanny.
I call it
Really
the
uncanny.
44 million to 1 against, but I love that house, and I still love the house, and it's like it wanted me back again. I know it
Yeah.
sounds crazy, but I swear to you, that is 100% true. It really is.
Oh, that's so lovely. And with the man and the dog and everything, it sounds like it must be residual because it happens like in like the dog coming in and then the man outside and everything. Do you think he's
My
almost like a
mother firmly
protector?
believed, my mother firmly believed, Kate,
Yeah.
that that dog was welcoming the family. My mother
Yeah.
firmly
Oh,
believed that that dog
sweet.
was welcoming the family and welcomed Maureen's brother when he was in that room as well.
Oh, that's a lovely story. Well, I
I
hope
was
maybe
witness.
one day you might get to go back again. That wasn't the last time.
I would love to buy that house, Kate. I would
Yeah.
absolutely love to buy that house. The story is actually on YouTube under the 44 million to 1. Um,
Okay.
it's and there's actual pictures of the house itself, which makes it even more.
Oh,
So if people like to watch that, it's Simon Entwistle, YouTube, 44 million to 1, and you can
that's great.
see the whole
Thank you.
story.
I'll definitely gonna watch it again. Yeah, and listen again. That's a fascinating story. Thank you so much, Simon, for telling
My
me.
pleasure, Kate.
Thank you very much. So I've got one more question for you, Simon. When
Yep.
you come to Scotland,
I love Scotland. I'm a huge fan of the great city of Edinburgh, of course, but I love Pittenween and Fife, beautiful county, Fife, and Dundee, of course. But yes, Scotland holds a place in my heart. It really does.
what you never mentioned Glasgow.
Well, that's a great city, of course, a great city. In fact, the second city of the empire, as he used to call it.
I mean, you know, Eileen, somebody from Fife. No, Eileen's no from Fife. Eileen's from the Edinburgh area. Ouija boy. I bet you that's Eileen or somebody. You need to come to Glasgow. We've got a lot of great stuff. We've got McDonald's and KFC. You
I'm
know,
sure. I'm sure. Yeah.
stuff like that. I do apologise for my coughing and stuff. I've been smited with a heavy cold, you know what I mean? But
No
I think,
joke.
oh, it's murder. It's absolutely, and my hearing's away in that ear as well. So I've fallen apart, but I don't need any sympathy. I'm not looking at it's Kelly's from Fishes. We're off to Dunfermline Abbey again on Friday. We were there 2 weeks ago. A beautiful place, absolutely stunning place. It's where Robert the Bruce is buried, and also William Wallace's mother's reported to be buried there as well. Pictures are up on Facebook, so we're off there on Friday again to because the last time we were there, it was typical Scotland. It was okay for about 10-15 minutes, and then the heavens opened. You know, so that was it. But we're hoping Friday the weather will be okay.
I just wanted to say, like, the takeaway from this, I would just like to say thank you to Simon for coming on and being able to talk to you. It's been an absolute pleasure and so happy. I'm definitely going to send you the recent YouTube video which you are in, so you can see the hundreds upon hundreds of comments giving
Thank you,
you
Kate.
such praise, and
Oh,
we
gosh.
definitely need to get you on YouTube and get your audiobook out there 100%,
Thank you, Kate.
because you deserve it. You really need to be out there, Simon.
I just need a technical assistant, Kate. That's all I need, really.
I'll do what I can.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
With pleasure.
And you're based in Chicago, Kate?
Yes. I'm originally from Norwich.
Yep.
That's my childhood home. And then I'm an English teacher. So I moved to Spain for 6 months, and then I lived in Italy for 4 years, and then I moved to Germany for 5 years, and now we're here for
Wow.
Yeah, for a bit until
You've
the
done a lot
next
of travelling.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, that's my daughter in the background playing the maracas, as you do.
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, we've been very, very lucky. Oh, another Norwich person! Amazing. Yeah. So yeah, I love history because I love to get to know, the places where we live and all of the local history, and it's also different countries,
Yes.
different history, right? And it's just fascinating. Even the language, the way that history is told through the language is very, very different as well, especially Latin. So yeah, very cool, very interesting. So yeah,
I just want to mirror what Kate was saying, Simon. So we've joined quite a few times, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. And
thank you, Scott.
The way you tell the stories, not just the Pendle ones. I've watched your stuff in the Graveyard Tales, or was it you did?
Tales from the Graves. Yeah, there's a series on. It's actually called Tales from the Graves, and there's a. Every grave has of course, the story behind the person in the grave, and I tend to bring those stories to life. Really, it's not morbid. It's just called Tales from the Graves. People that have passed away, and it's bringing their stories to life, really, which I do enjoy. Really, it's not actually morbid. It's not like going to cemeteries and things, but you bring the stories to life. Tales from the Graves.
200% agree with you, Simon. I've said this on quite a few shows and stuff, and I've spoke to a few people. We all get into graveyard cemeteries, walk around, so that's a lovely headstone. That's nice, I've done it myself, but I think we need to realise that the people that are interred there were, they did have lives. They were somebody's mother, father, whatever.
Of course,
and
yes, yeah.
That's what we're trying to do with a place we've been working at, Loud and Kirk. People there, it's a family that's interred there, and we're trying to bring their story to life because there's a great deal of history there, and all these people mattered, and so they do deserve to be, where possible, to have their story told, no matter how small it was. They might have been a carpenter or whatever, but there is always a story. There, I love finding the story behind the people. It's Liam for Highland Paranormal. Lots of stories leak from Heston's. As I always, just quickly, I always would want to. I've been Greyfriars many times, but down the bottom end of Greyfriars, there is it's a massive headstone on the wall, and it's an entire family that's there, and it's got the names and dates where they were born in the past. And I stood one day. Don't know how, quite a while, just reading this, and it basically tells you the story of the family. Their kids passed away at very young ages, and so you start wondering, well, I wonder what happened to them. Why did they die so young? Was it a disease or something? And then the wife, she died within a year of the husband. You think, well, did she die of a broken heart, or was it some kind of disease in the family? And it does make you think, and it does make you, notice things. Whereas people would just maybe generally walk by and think, "Oh, that's lovely," and keep going.
That's right, Scott. I could be wrong, Scott. I think J.K. Rowling used the cemetery for a lot of her stories, a lot of her characters in Harry Potter. I think because they are like Lord Voldemort and those characters. Yeah.
Sarah would be able to. Sarah's a Harry Potter fan. We were actually watching the films last week or the week before. No, she did. She took quite a lot of inspiration from Kirkcars in Edinburgh. John Riddle as well. I think he was connected to Mary Queen of Scots or something. I could be wrong. Sarah would be able to tell you. She's a Harry Potter buff, not me. I'm more your blood and guts kind of man. People losing limbs and stuff like that. That's what I'm into.
There's the Mackenzie in the Troon Kirk. You've got the Mackenzie vault, haven't you? Which is quite. He was the Lord Advocate, wasn't he? A Lord Advocate.
He was the Lord Chief Advocate to Charles II. He is buried. He actually died. He actually passed away in London, Westminster, in London, but he was brought back to Edinburgh. So him and his family's interred in the Mackenzie Mausoleum. There's also another 3 people interred, but nobody knows who they are. But there's another 3 coffins there. We have visited there many, many times. You're not allowed into the actual tomb itself. It's locked.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons, but he is in there. And obviously you get the Covenanters prison, which is now locked due to the amount of attacks that happened in it, basically. But George Mackenzie, you got all the story. I'm studying Scots law. It's interesting about Mackenzie, Lord Advocate. Thank you. He was the Lord Chief Advocate to Charles II, and the War of the Covenanters. At the Battle of Bonnybrig, there was 1,200 Covenanters rounded up, and they were marched to Edinburgh. Bonnybrig is quite a distance from Edinburgh, but they were marched to Edinburgh, and they were put in what's called the Covenanters prison. It wasn't a prison as such; it was just open fields, basically, and they were guarded day and night, treated rather very, very harshly by the guards. Over the years, there's tombs being built up in there, but this is where they actually were. But you get all the stories about Mackenzie poltergeist and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's not true. The Mackenzie, Jan Henderson, who owns City of the Dead Tours, there's over 3,000 reported attacks in the Covenanters prison. Now, we have a theory about it. It's centred around the Black Mausoleum. Now, the Black Mausoleum is the resting place of the Dundas family, who were a well-to-do family, well-respected, The attacks seem to happen around about here. Our theory is that, the attacks have taken place, have been documented, and in 1 month, 11 ambulances were called to the prison. That's why the council decided enough's enough. We're locking the gates. That's it. But we're fortunate enough to have access to it. Our theory is that it's one of the guards, one of the former guards that's still there. And he still sees this area as his, basically. And so anybody that goes in, they're kind of imposters, intruders, they're in his territory. It's just a theory, but who knows? But the Mackenzie poltergeist, Jan Henderson, who wrote The Ghost That Haunted Itself. It's all about the attacks in the Covenanters prison. He needed a name for the entity, spirit, whatever you want to call it. So he decided to call it the Mackenzie poltergeist. Plain and simple. But then these paranormal teams going in and saying they'd made contact with the Mackenzie poltergeist, they'd found them, but there's no documented evidence to say that George Mackenzie still roams Greyfriars. We don't think he does, but that's just our theory,
Right, right.
But sorry, I could talk forever about Edinburgh and Greyfriars and, stuff. Sorry, I went away off topic there, guys, But I think we'll wind it up there for now. We'd love to have you back again, Simon, as always. But I'll hold on to the 2 years just for a wee second after we come off.
Sure, yeah.
So, where's the best place to find you, Simon? And don't say Pendle.
Well, I've got a lot of work coming up, actually. It's a very, very busy time of year for me, really. We got the Pendle Trials tour on Sunday. I've then got Salisbury Hall, Brusham Hall, and I've got this fantastic night undercover at the Bistro at the Holmes Mill complex in Clitheroe. Looking forward to that very much indeed. But I do have a lot of brand new stories, Scott. So the next time we talk, I've got some brand new material for you.
I'm going to send you some dates, my man. Get you back on. Definitely.
Yeah, I really must get my technical skills together because it's a shame I can't project myself onto the screen, folks.
Oh, no problem. We can sort it for next time. But thank you so much, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to talk to you. And
it's been a pleasure talking to you, Kate, as well, really. And thank you very much for those kind comments. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You've got lots of admirers, hundreds. just so you know.
Well, that's very, very nice to know.
I'm sure Kate will be able to help you with your technical stuff.
Thank you.
So we'll wind up there, folks. So thanks to Kate for joining us, but a major thanks to Mr Entwistle down there. I know you couldn't see him, but you could hear him, and that's the main thing. And so we're back on Wednesday night. We get sort of kind of different show for you on Wednesday night. We've got Highland Cathedral Scottish folk singer Robin Reid coming in. First time we've met Robin, and a wee treat planned for you as well. And then we're off to Dunfermline on Friday. But Simon, I'm going to get it organised with Simon to get him back on, because I want to hear his news stories as well. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you.
We'll say good night just now, people. And thanks for coming in and for all your comments. And we'll talk to you again soon. All right. So take care for now, folks. Bye.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.